What if I told you there exists a plant whose seeds offer a more balanced and abundant source of essential omega-3 fatty acids than a fillet of salmon, while simultaneously providing a more complete and digestible form of protein than a sirloin steak? What if this same plant required no herbicides, purified polluted soil, and could be transformed into a material stronger than concrete, all while using a fraction of the water needed for conventional crops like cotton or almonds? Now, confront the legal absurdity that follows. In countless regions, the very act of placing a seed of this plant into the ground, with the intent to grow food, not to alter consciousness, is a criminal act punishable by fines, property seizure, and imprisonment. We have normalized a profound illogic. You may legally purchase, consume, and benefit from the oil in the food product, but you are forbidden from participating in its most fundamental step, cultivation. This disconnect is not a flaw in the system. It is the system's core feature. When a self-replicating source of profound nutrition and industrial utility is ringed with legal barbed wire, you are not observing a public health policy. You are witnessing the enforcement of an economic quarantine. The history of this plant is not a story of a dangerous substance being controlled. It is the story of a benevolent resource being kidnapped and the public being convinced to pay the ransom. By the end of this investigation, you will know precisely what this plant is: the documented conspiracy of industries that orchestrated its disappearance, the government agencies that served as their enforcement wing, and the devastating price we have all paid in health, sovereignty, and ecological resilience. This is a forensic audit of a century-long crime against human potential. This channel is dedicated to structural analysis through evidence. We identify points where official narratives fracture under the weight of financial records, historical timing, and suppressed data. Our method is systematic. We follow the capital to its source, expose the vested interests operating behind public statements, and reconstruct the timeline of motive and opportunity. In an information ecosystem designed to obscure these connections, this work is inherently countercultural. If you value investigations that trace power to its origin, from shareholder reports to legislative writers, consider subscribing. Your support directly enables the preservation and dissemination of unvarnished analysis. The subject is industrial hemp, the cannabis sativa L, plant cultivated explicitly for its nutritional seed, durable fiber, and industrial biomass. This clarification is the critical fulcrum. This is not a discussion about psychoactivity. That persistent, deliberate conflation is the legal sleight of hand upon which the entire suppression apparatus depends. This is an examination of a foundational food crop and industrial raw material that has been unlawfully held captive by a narrative engineered for profit. Before you dismiss this based on a lifetime of associative conditioning, you must consciously reset your framework. What you've been taught about this plant is a weaponized fragment of its reality, curated to evoke fear and justify control. The true controversy is not the plant's properties, but the motives of those who outlawed it. The nutritional profile of hemp seed alone invalidates its criminal status under any rational framework. Fatty acid superiority. Hemp seeds are one of the few plant sources that provide both essential fatty acids, omega-6 linoleic acid, La, and omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid, La, in the ideal 3:1 ratio recognized by nutritionists as optimal for human health. Unlike fish oil, which can be contaminated with heavy metals and is subject to oceanic depletion, hemp seed oil provides a stable, sustainable, and clean source of these critical fats, which are fundamental to reducing systemic inflammation, supporting brain function, and maintaining cardiovascular health. Protein completeness and bioavailability. Hemp seed protein is a complete, globular edestin protein, containing all 9 essential amino acids in a proportion that closely mirrors human protein requirements. Its digestibility score surpasses that of soy, dairy, and many meat proteins, meaning the body can utilize more of what it consumes with less metabolic waste. Per 30-gram serving, hemp seeds provide approximately 10 grams of this superior protein. Biological integration. The human endocannabinoid system, ECS, is a master regulatory network that maintains internal balance. The unique lipid profile of hemp seeds, including the presence of rare gamma-linolenic acid, GLA, and sterols, provides the foundational building blocks for endocannabinoid signaling molecules. Consuming hemp is not administering a drug. It is providing the nutritional substrate for a core physiological system to function optimally. The economic thread of such a plant is explicit and multifaceted. Hemp presents a direct, superior competitor to the fish oil omega-3 supplement industry as a cleaner, more sustainable, and better balanced source of essential fats. The animal agriculture industry, as a land-efficient and water-efficient source of complete protein and healthy fats, without the environmental or ethical overhead. The pharmaceutical industry, as a broad-spectrum nutritional support system for the ECS, potentially addressing the root causes of inflammation and imbalance for which countless single-molecule drugs are prescribed. The petrochemical plastics industries, through its cellulose and fiber for bioplastics and composites. It is inherently scalable, requires no patent-protected inputs, and can be cultivated by anyone with access to land and seed. It is the antithesis of a captive consumer market. This presents an intellectual imperative. If industrial hemp is this nutritionally profound, this environmentally regenerative, and this economically versatile, why does its cultivation, the most basic act of agricultural and personal sovereignty, remain a heavily restricted or outright criminal activity in so many places? Why was this historical cornerstone of human agriculture systematically erased? The transition from staple to contraband was not driven by science or safety. It was driven by ledger books. Agricultural pillar, pre-20th century hemp, is one of humanity's oldest cultivated crops, used for textiles, cordage, paper, and food for over 10,000 years. It was so vital that its cultivation was legally mandated in the American colonies. The USDA actively promoted it into the early 1900s. The technological trigger, 1930s, the invention of the mechanical decorticator, a machine to efficiently separate hemp fibers, threatened to revolutionize paper, textile, and material production, making hemp the cheapest and most efficient source for these commodities. This promised efficiency posed an existential threat to several established industrial empires. The Protectionist Coalition mobilizes. A triad of interests with direct financial exposure acted in concert. William Randolph Hearst, Hearst Paper Manufacturing Division / Kimberly-Clark, owned millions of acres of timberland for newsprint. The prospect of cheap hemp paper threatened his core asset value and business model. He controlled a vast chain of national newspapers. The DuPont Corporation had just patented nylon, a petroleum-based synthetic fiber, and processes for making plastics and paper from wood pulp. DuPont's internal communications and annual reports from the 1930s explicitly tied the company's future profitability to the market success of these new petrochemical products. Natural hemp was direct, superior competition. Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury, DuPont's primary banker, appointed his nephew-in-law, Harry J. Anslinger, as the first commissioner of the new Federal Bureau of Narcotics, creating a compliant regulatory weapon. The legislative coup, 1937, utilizing Hearst's media empire to wage a racist, sensationalist propaganda campaign around the Mexican term marijuana. Anslinger orchestrated truncated, one-sided congressional hearings. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was passed, using punitive taxation and impossible compliance requirements to destroy the commercial hemp industry within a year. The Permanent Lock, 1970, the Controlled Substances Act, drafted with Anslinger's influence, placed all cannabis, including non-psychoactive hemp, in Schedule I. This was a political classification, enacted without the scientific review required today, that legally defined this food and fiber crop as more dangerous than cocaine and without medical use, cementing the economic blockade into permanent law. Public perception was not shifted. It was assaulted through a coordinated disinformation campaign. Linguistic weaponization. The familiar hemp was replaced with marijuana to associate it with Mexican immigrants and stoke xenophobic and racial fear. Fabricated science media complicity. Hearst papers ran headlines like, "Marijuana makes fiends of boys in 30 days," publishing wholly fictional accounts of violence and insanity. Anslinger's testimony to Congress included blatantly racist fabrications, claiming the drug caused pacifist black men to become violent and disrespectful of white authority. Racial and social scapegoating. The campaign explicitly targeted minority communities, jazz culture, and political dissidents, using the plant as a pretext for social control and the consolidation of power. Strategic inflation. The distinct, non-psychoactive industrial and nutritional plant was intentionally conflated with all cannabis varieties to simplify the fear narrative and taint the entire species by association. This was not a public education effort. It was a commercial smear campaign leveraging state power. The toll of this economic protectionism is vast and measurable. The criminalization of autonomy. Hundreds of thousands of individuals have been arrested and incarcerated for the act of cultivating a plant, even for personal nutritional use. These arrests carry lifelong collateral consequences. Agricultural devolution. Generations of farmers were denied access to a profitable, soil-regenerating crop, forcing reliance on ecologically destructive monocultures dependent on patented seeds and chemical inputs. Nutritional poverty. The public was systematically deprived of one of the most nutritionally dense food sources on the planet, a factor that may have contributed to widespread deficiencies in essential fatty acids and complete plant-based proteins. Disparate justice. Enforcement has been a tool of systemic oppression. Black Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis offenses than white Americans, perpetuating cycles of poverty and disenfranchisement. The cost is quantified in lost freedom, degraded health, and fractured communities. Contemporary evidence has completely dismantled the Prohibition's foundation, scientific revelation. The discovery and mapping of the endocannabinoid system, ECS, in the 1990s provided the biological mechanism for the plant's historical nutritional and therapeutic use. The World Health Organization has stated CBD poses no public health risk. Failed predictions. In jurisdictions that have legalized hemp cultivation, the predicted agricultural, social, and health catastrophes have not occurred. Instead, new markets for sustainable food, fiber, and bioplastics have emerged. Institutional hypocrisy. The U.S. government holds patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants. Major pharmaceutical and agribusiness corporations are now patenting hemp-derived compounds and seed genetics, profiting from a biology their predecessors conspired to outlaw. The double standard is codified. The plant is a Schedule I narcotic, while its isolated, corporatized components are patented commodities. The resistance to full legalization is anchored in powerful, entrenched interests. The pharmaceutical nutraceutical industry, a widely available, low-cost whole food that supports core human regulatory systems, is a direct threat to markets for patented antidepressants, statins, anti-inflammatory drugs, and single-molecule nutritional supplements. The industrial agribusiness chemical complex. Companies like Bayer, Monsanto, and Corteva, whose profits depend on the sale of patented GMO seeds, glyphosate, and synthetic fertilizers for commodity crops, are threatened by a hardy, low-input, open-pollinated competitor like hemp. The processed food commodity industry, a decentralized source of complete nutrition and healthy fats, undermines the economic model of centralized processing, long-haul transportation, and brand-dependent consumption. The private prison law enforcement lobby, budgets, staffing, and asset forfeiture revenue streams are partially dependent on the continued criminalization of plant cultivation. Legalizing personal and commercial hemp cultivation dismantles these interlocking revenue models, explaining the persistent bureaucratic and legislative obstruction. Reframe the entire narrative. This was never about safety, health, or morality. Opioids are Schedule II prescription drugs. Alcohol, a known toxin and carcinogen, is culturally embedded. This was about control over the means of producing food, medicine, and material. It was about profit, protecting centralized, patent-based industries from decentralized, natural abundance. It was about manufacturing dependence on corporate pharmaceuticals, corporate agrochemicals, and globalized commodity chains. You were not uninformed. You were the target of a century-long, multi-billion-dollar propaganda operation designed to make you an accomplice in your own dispossession. The imperative now is direct, personal verification. Read the 1938 Popular Mechanics article, New Billion-Dollar Crop, that touted hemp's potential. Analyze the third-party lab reports on a container of hemp seed oil. Review the financial disclosures of key individuals in the 1930s coalition. Examine the current patent portfolios of the pharmaceutical companies now leading cannabinoid research. Ask, with precision, who benefits from a legal framework where you can buy the product but are forbidden from growing the source? Who profits from maintaining the deliberate confusion between an agricultural staple and a psychoactive drug? The discussion is about reclaiming agency. How do we restore the right to cultivate nutrition, resilience, and independence? Your critical inquiry is the necessary first step. If this investigation has reconnected these deliberately severed lines of evidence, your conscious engagement helps rebuild a framework of reality based on documentation, not dogma. In the final analysis, this is not about a plant. It is about the fundamental human right to access and utilize the tools of sustenance and health provided by the natural world. That right was legislated away. Understanding the architecture of that theft is the only path to its restoration.